Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We will get started here in just a few minutes, but my name is Lakelyn Hogan. I'm Home Instead's gerontologist and caregiver advocate, and I'm joined by a good friend of Home Instead today, Dr. Erin Blight. I will formally introduce him in just a minute, but hi, Erin. How are you doing?
Hi, Lakeland. I'm doing great. Thanks for having me today.
Oh, so excited to have you with us and excited to dive into today's topic. But before we do that, again, I just want to welcome everyone. I know we're on Zoom, but we're also live on Facebook, and you are joining our Caregiver Chat series sponsored by Home Instead. If you want to learn more about Home Instead, you can visit our website at homeinstead.com. We also have a Facebook group where we post about these chats. We put the recorded version back out there for people to watch, to share. You can follow us on Facebook, and we'll drop the link for that in the chat box. And I think one of the beautiful parts of this chat series is that we take questions live. So Erin and I will be having a discussion, and then towards the end of our chat, we will be taking your questions. So feel free to type them at any time on Zoom into the Q&A box or the chat function. And on Facebook, just comment below, and we will take as many of your questions as we can throughout this hour. So again, we want to welcome you. Today, we're going to be talking about taking time to reflect as a caregiver. And over the years, working with caregivers, I've noticed that oftentimes caregivers are so focused on the task at hand, that they rarely have time to reflect on their own role as a caregiver and really how their caregiving journey has changed over time. And when you think about how people come into the caregiving role, some are thrust into the caregiving role, their loved one has an accident or a fall or a diagnosis. And then for others, it's a multi-year journey. They kind of ease into it over time, taking on more responsibilities. But no matter how you come to caregiving, sometimes it can be overwhelming and stressful. So I'm really excited to talk today with Dr. Erin Blight about this topic and how reflection can help caregivers change their mindset and really transform the caregiving experience. So a little more about Dr. Erin Blight. He is an international speaker and consultant on caregiving, aging, and healthcare. He is the founder of Caregiving Kinetics and co-creator of the Caregiver Transformation Retreat. Erin's passion for supporting caregivers is rooted in a variety of things. First, his prior work as a Home Instead franchise owner and as a leader in the healthcare policy world at the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. He also has studied caregiving as a phenomenon of social science, and he has personal family caregiving experience. Erin was recently recognized as a top 100 healthcare leader by the International Forum on Advancements in Healthcare. And Dr. Blight is an international speaker and consultant on caregiving, aging, and healthcare. He's written a book, When Caregiving Calls, Guidance as You Prepare for a Parent, Spouse, or Aging Relative. It received a 2020 Best Indie Book Award, and he's the founder of Caregiving Kinetics and serves as an adjunct professor of healthcare management and health policy at Shenandoah University. So welcome, Dr. Blight. We're so excited to have you.
Thank you, Lakeland. I'm really excited to be here with you today.
Well, and I'm excited to talk about reflecting on your caregiving journey because people just in general don't take enough time to pause and reflect on our experiences and how they've impacted us. So I'm really excited to dive into that. But as I mentioned just a moment ago, you have your own kind of personal story of family caregiving. And I would love for you to share that with everyone today, just so they can get to know you a little bit more and your background in caregiving.
Yeah, so caregiving entered my life at a very unexpected time. As you were talking about a little bit about my background, I was at the National Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. I was writing national healthcare policy, actually for elderly and disabled people. But I didn't really know a whole lot about being elderly or disabled. I was 29 years old at the time, and I myself did not have a disability. But my mother-in-law was given an unexpected diagnosis of a brain tumor. It just came out of the blue. The brain tumor was the size of a golf ball. She was 59, and the doctors told her that she had weeks to live. They recommended immediate brain surgery. And they said if she survived the OR and if the brain surgery took proper effect, that maybe she would live 6 to 9 months.
Mm.
And so the extent of our thought was, well, mom needs help. We're going to help her. And we invited her into our home to recover from that first brain surgery. She was supposed to stay in our house for 2 weeks. And she ended up staying in our home for almost 2 years. She went
Wow.
through a second brain surgery. She went through radiation and chemotherapy treatments, all while she was in our home. And we had young children. We had 3 young children and a 4th one that was born while my mother-in-law lived in our home. And the cancer miraculously went into remission. She lived for 5.5 years after that original diagnosis, but she was in a state of slow cognitive decline for that entire time. The residual effects of that brain surgery led her to have this decreasing cognition. And so we were always going over to her place to help her all the way up to the end of her life. And the last couple months of her life, the cancer came back with a vengeance, and she opted not to pursue any more treatments. And we were referred by hospice to a non-medical home care company. And they were a godsend for us. We wish that we had called them sooner. They relieved my wife and me of all of the caregiving tasks, the physical tasks of caregiving that we were responsible for. And especially my wife was able to really focus on the emotional and the relationship aspects of her mother dying in the last couple months of her life. And so after she passed away a year later, I did some reflection. I know we're going to talk about reflection, and thought about my career and my life, and realized that I felt called, to be honest, to help families that were in situations like mine. And that led me to becoming a franchise owner of Home Instead Senior Care. So I had my own home care company here in the northern Shenandoah Valley of Virginia and the eastern panhandle of West Virginia. And I got to help thousands of families that were in situations like mine. And then I studied caregiving in connection with my doctoral degree, and really came to understand caregiving at a much deeper level. And so after I sold my home care business 4 years ago, since that time, I've been out speaking to groups, to professional and family caregivers everywhere about the caregiving experience.
Thank you so much for sharing your caregiving journey. And it sounds like you just have such great experience from multiple perspectives of the Medicare side of things, from the home care owner side, from the personal experience, and then being able to share that. And I'm sure you probably feel the same way, but when I work with caregivers, I learn so much from them too, and draw on their experiences, and am able to share those out with other caregivers that I meet. So again, so grateful that you're here today, and excited to talk about the notion of reflection. And I mentioned earlier that, caregiving can become overwhelming, and it really can have an impact on the caregiver themselves. And so, Erin, I'd love to hear your thoughts about how the caregiving role can affect the person providing care.
Well, maybe there are a lot of ways, Lakelyn, but I would like to share maybe one thought from my own experience early on. And as a 29-year-old male providing for my family, I just never imagined that I would be in that situation. And I was not prepared for it. And on the one hand, I wanted to be there for my mother-in-law, and I wanted to help her and provide her with everything that she needed. She was a wonderful mother-in-law. I loved her. She was a fantastic person, and she treated me like a son from the moment that I met her daughter. And I wanted her to be in our home because I wanted to help her. She didn't ask to have cancer. But at the same time, I felt this internal turmoil and this conflict about her being there. And I kind of resented it. And the longer that time went on, the more conflicted I felt about it. And so I was going through my own emotional conflict about being in this caregiver role at a time that I didn't expect and didn't really want. And so caregiving can become overwhelming from an emotional standpoint, from a relationship standpoint. Our relationship with my mother-in-law and my wife's relationship with her mom fundamentally changed because of caregiving. Her relationship with her grandchildren, our children, they only remember her being sick. But in addition to that, family caregivers face a lot of other demands on their time. There's a displacement of time and activities that caregiving introduces into your life. Things that you used to do before, you don't have time to do necessarily anymore. And so it can be very mentally, emotionally, physically draining. You have to learn how to perform all of these caregiving tasks that you have never been trained to do as a family caregiver. And so that adds to your stress, and it can really take a toll on your well-being.
Absolutely. I think that you made so many great points there. And that displacement of time, you as a caregiver want to be able to dedicate all of your time to all aspects of your life, but it can really be challenging when your loved one has immediate needs or you feel that you need to make those priority. And so, it can impact that allocation of time, but also it can impact emotionally too, because you're trying to be there for everyone in your life and accomplish everything you set out for in the day. And sometimes it doesn't always work out as planned, I know, for caregivers. So the impacts really can be multifaceted. And I know that we have some great resources that we'll be posting throughout our chat today on caregiving, so that if you need more support and resources, you can go out and read more about that. There's a great article on managing the emotions of caregiving, and also when we talk about sometimes becoming overwhelmed, it's also important while the caregivers providing for the care receiver or recipient, your loved one, their needs are, of course, important, but the caregiver themselves needs to remember that it's not selfish to take care of yourself as a caregiver so you can continue to provide the best care possible for your loved one. Aaron, did you find that to be true in your own caregiving situation?
Absolutely, Lakelyn, and I saw that also in my home care company, working with family caregivers all over my community. So often they were willing to sacrifice their own well-being for their loved ones, and they did not necessarily stop to take time for themselves and to recharge their batteries. And it's so important to realize that for you to be an optimal care provider for your loved one, you need to make sure that you are adding fuel to your tank and that you are taking care of yourself so that you're physically, spiritually, emotionally ready to take care of your loved one as your loved one's needs evolve over time. And it might seem like, yeah, that's hard to do, but it's necessary. You will be a better caregiver. You'll be happier as long as you are also paying attention to your own health and well-being.
Absolutely. And you said something so important for this conversation of reflecting, is that the caregiver's role changes over time because the person that they're caring for, their needs change over time. And so at the beginning of your caregiving journey, you might, your relationship with that person might look one way, and then fast forward a few years and it could look dramatically different. So when you talk about the power of reflection, those are some of the things that you and I talked about. Caregivers can reflect on those types of changes in their caregiving journey. So can you tell us more about how reflection can be helpful, and really the reasons behind why it can be so beneficial for caregivers?
Yeah, so Lakelyn, as you said earlier, I am a doctor, but I'm a doctor of learning. My doctoral degree is actually in education. My degree is in human and organizational learning. So I have studied the process that we go through as adults in learning. And caregiving is really a transformative learning experience.
Mm.
And it can change the way that we perceive ourselves, the way that we see our relationship with our loved one, the way that we see the world around us. And there are few things in life, I think, that affect us in this way, as in the same way that caregiving does. And so we also know from studies of adult learning that intentional, deliberate reflection is a gateway to learning and to better understanding. And as you said during your intro, Lakelyn, it's so easy to just be wrapped up on the to-do list.
Mhm.
There's always a checklist of things that you have to do as a caregiver. And it's important for you to step back and think about more deeply what you're doing and how it's affecting you. And when you take that time to reflect, you're going to open your mind and your heart to new ways of seeing, new ways of doing, new ways of being that can improve your caregiving experience, that can improve your relationship with your loved one, that can help you find solutions to some of your challenges. And so rather than being just like the hamster on the wheel, just running and running and running and running and running, stepping off of that wheel for a few minutes and asking yourself, how are things going and what does this mean for me in my life, can have a major impact on your well-being and on your success over the long trajectory of caregiving. And I think that one more thing that you mentioned, Lakelyn, there is that the recognition that caregiving is a process of continual adaptation to your loved one's needs. It's not a static thing. Like where your loved one is today is where your loved one is today. But tomorrow or 2 months from now or 6 months from now, your loved one could be in a very different place. And as a caregiver, you have to accommodate those changes. You have to adapt to meet their needs where they are today, each and every day. And so that might mean that who you are in the relationship and how you interact with your loved one will change. So again, reflecting on that, past, present, and future, can really help you to be more effective in your caregiver role.
Yeah, I think that those pausing to reflect on those questions and realizing that as a caregiver you are learning and growing, and for many of us, like you at age 29, you had never been a caregiver before. You were just kind of stepping into this role for the first time, and even if you have cared for someone in the past, this new person you're providing care for, their care needs might be different. And so you're learning how to care for that person specifically. So I think sometimes caregivers, we can tend to be hard on ourselves just in general as humans. I know I'm a type A kind of personality, and oftentimes I have to remind myself to be kind to myself. And sometimes caregivers can really put a lot of pressure on themselves to be the perfect caregiver, or they feel like they're not doing enough. But really, I love how you kind of phrased it in the way that, it's a learning process. Whenever we start a new job, whether it's a new caregiving role or a professional job, there is that learning curve. And it takes time to settle into that role, to get in a good routine, to learn all the acronyms. And in caregiving, there's a lot of resources and supports. It takes time to learn that. And so I think that reminding ourselves of that, and that it's okay to not feel like you know it all, because again, you're starting this new job of a caregiver, or new role of a caregiver, but then pausing along the way to do some reflection. And I think one of the things I love about your book, which I have a copy and was going through, is that you do at the end of each chapter have those questions for the caregiver to pause and reflect on. Because as a caregiver, you might feel like, okay, well, sure, I'll be open to reflecting, but what should I reflect on? So, Aaron, are there a couple questions that you would suggest to caregivers that they start with as kind of a way to reflect, and maybe what's the best way to engage in reflection?
Yeah. Well, Lakelyn, there really is no cookie cutter approach to caregiving. And in my book, When Caregiving Calls, I don't take a cookie cutter approach. I find that often caregivers themselves have access to the best solutions for their challenges, but they may not know the questions to ask, as you said. So the book has 18 chapters, and each chapter gives some helpful information about the caregiving experience and the caregiving process. But then at the end of each chapter, there are questions for reflection that are designed to prompt the family caregiver to think about their own individual situation and recognize, how can I do things differently or better? And we said that we were going to not have the phone ring, and I thought I did that. I'm sorry. I don't know what happened.
All good.
But so an early reader of the book, she's a family caregiver, and I was talking to her about I asked her about the questions for reflection. And she said, well, I liked the questions for reflection, but I didn't like the questions for reflection. And I said, well, what do you mean by that? And she goes, well, I guess there were just some questions that I did not want to think about. And then she goes, but I know, and I knew that I had to think about them, so they were good. And that's kind of how she left it. And, unwittingly, she really summarized the reason that those questions are in there, because as a caregiver, you may find some things that are kind of unpleasant to think about, or things that you just want to sweep under the rug. There are different strategies that caregivers use to cope, and some of that could be denial, or just not dealing with some of the things that they know that they have to deal with. But once you confront some of those hard realities of caregiving, and reflect on how can you handle them better, it's going to put you in a better place and a better position to handle those now and in the future. So you asked for a couple of examples of questions.
Yeah.
So one of the chapters in the book is chapter 3, and it's called Relationship. It's about the relationship that you have with your loved one who's receiving care from you. And on page 41, these are just a couple of the reflection questions to give you an idea of, and I think these are good questions for all caregivers to ask themselves. How would you describe your historic relationship with your loved one who's receiving care? How would you describe your current relationship with your loved one who's receiving care? So when you compare the historic relationship to the current relationship, you might discover that, well, things are really different. And so the next question is, well, how has caregiving, the act of caregiving, impacted your relationship with your loved one? And this is a very important question, Lakelyn. How do you feel about the impact that caregiving has had on your relationship with your loved one? And so many times, again, caregivers are so wrapped up in just doing what their loved one needs, that they suppress some of the feelings, the sensitive, raw feelings that they're having about what's actually happening in their relationship. And so being able to reflect on that, those feelings that you're having about the changes in the relationship, it's very important, and it will open the door for you to start to receive some help and some support if you need it.
Yeah, I think sometimes confronting our raw emotions is hard for us. And so I think that question, and some of you listening today, you might be, maybe this is opening your mind up to reflect yourself on those questions. And, you might feel a mix of emotions. You might feel, overwhelmed. You might feel appreciative of this time with your loved one. You might feel resentful that, you're the only one that stepped up to the plate. You might feel joy for the purpose that this role provides for you. So I know, Erin, you have a great resource that helps identify emotions and kind of an emotional assessment. And I think that, as caregivers are reflecting and going through some of these questions, sometimes it's hard to put a term to what you're feeling until you see all the different emotions kind of painted out there in front of you. And you think, oh, that actually, I do feel that emotion. And sometimes just acknowledging it can just be so helpful. And maybe it's just, processing through that. Maybe it's journaling, or as you mentioned, maybe it is a time where the caregiver decides, professional counseling or talking to a therapist might be good for me to continually talk through these feelings. And I know the pandemic has made that more accessible than ever with online counseling and phone counseling. And of course, there's the in-person that has always existed. But connecting with those feelings and emotions can, I would imagine, help a caregiver really process through, and then also help kind of move forward and, as you mentioned, find new strategies or new ways to cope with the emotions, or to really just lean into the caregiver role a little more now that they've had time to process that. Yeah, the relationship has changed. And you know what? I'm accepting that and moving forward in this role. So the power of reflection. Wow. It's really all coming full circle for me during this chat.
That's awesome. Yes, amen. Lakelyn, I agree. And when I was writing When Caregiving Calls, I started doing a little research and discovered that many psychologists use lists of emotions to help their patients process what they're experiencing and see a little bit more deeply how they're feeling about things. And so I assembled a list of emotions for the book, and it's now a downloadable resource on the website. And so I think that's about 150 different emotions. I've used this with caregivers where they download that list and they just by themselves quietly will review all of those different emotions and circle the emotions that are most applicable to how they feel as a caregiver. And there are positive and negative and anxious and ambivalent emotions that are on there. And then, after, if you do this little exercise and then go back and review which emotions did you circle, and what does that tell you about how caregiving is affecting you? And maybe that is the prompt that you need to go and access some of those resources that you were talking about, Lakelyn. It's okay to go and receive some counseling assistance or some assistance from a doctor, because you're going through a major transition in your life and in your relationship with your loved one. And getting some outside help for that would be very appropriate.
Thank you for sharing that, Aaron. And I know sometimes, as we're doing some reflecting and as caregivers are thinking about their role, sometimes we have assumptions about caregiving. And in your book, you talk about, kind of checking our assumptions and as caregivers. So can you provide some examples of that and how that can be beneficial for caregivers to kind of check in with their assumptions?
So, an assumption is a taken for granted belief about the world around you. It may not even be something that is expressed, but it's just something that you assume about the world. And caregiving can really challenge some of your assumptions and teach you. And once those assumptions are challenged and confronted, you realize, well, maybe some of my assumptions are a little bit off, and maybe I need to rethink what I have believed previously about the world. And so one example might be if you're an adult child and you're caring for a parent, and your parent raised you, your parent provided for you, you watched your parent your whole life function completely independently in the world. And now your parent is starting to become dependent upon you for care. And you may think, well, as the child in this relationship, I shouldn't be doing this. This is your belief about your relationship with your parent. They're independent. They can do it themselves, or it's not my place to help them. So that's an example. Another example might be this assumption that caregiving is always about burden and stress and overwhelm. And there's so much out there that focuses on the burden and the stress of caregiving. And yes, it can be stressful. It can be a burden. But at the same time, if you talk to family caregivers, especially those after their caregiving season is over, you learn that they find joy. They find a deeper sense of meaning and purpose. They find a lot of really profound rewards in caregiving. So caregiving is not only about burden and stress. It's also about meaning and relationships and love and humanity. And it teaches us what it means to be human and to be in a family. And oftentimes caregivers find that their relationship with their care receiver, maybe it was rocky in the past, it can change. It can actually improve during these twilight days and years of life of the care receiver. Another assumption that is made, I think, in our culture and in our society is about death. This is a topic that's almost taboo, but our assumption is that death is to be resisted. Death is to be prevented. And, in our practice of medicine, Atul Gawande wrote a book, Being Mortal, and I love his book. I recommend it to everywhere, but he said as a doctor, he was trained that death means failure. But if you talk to people who are dying, it's not that way. Oftentimes people are ready for death, and people want to accomplish certain things in their life and appreciate the lived moments that they have remaining, but they're not afraid and they're not resistant to death. And so what does that teach us about being mortal, about being human? So these are some really profound things that we can learn in the caregiving experience. And each caregiver has their own profound lessons and their own ways that their assumptions about life have been changed as a result of their caregiving experience.
Yeah, you're so right. There are just those various assumptions that we make. And I think when you talk about the one about caregiving as a burden, we recently did a live chat on finding the joy in caregiving, because you're right, there is so much that caregiving can bring to a person, so much fulfillment that it can provide. So if you want to go watch that chat, it was great. Loretta, Vinny, and I talked about the joys of caregiving, but also your assumptions on death and dying. And that is the great equalizer. We're all going to die, unfortunately.
I use that exact same term, that death is the great equalizer.
Yeah, it is. And if you didn't know, we're all going to die, newsflash. But we as a society, you're right, we avoid it. And we also did a live chat recently about living well until the end. And there's this whole movement that's starting to bubble up that just is not necessarily celebrating death, but talking about it, normalizing it, sharing experiences around death, so that when it happens to you or someone in your family, it's not seen as something that needs to be resisted, but how can we come around that loved one and make their end of life that much more fulfilling, and how can we be with that person and provide for them, through that end time. And so, we talk about reflecting and these assumptions, and in your book, you also talk about how there's opportunities for caregivers to improve their situation. And so can you talk a little bit more about that, how a caregiver can really identify those opportunities to improve the situation that they're in?
Well, I think that as we think about reflecting on one's caregiving experience and realizing that maybe there is a room for improvement, things that we could do better, there are a lot of resources that are available for family caregivers, and there are more today than there have ever been. One of the resources that I love to recommend to family caregivers is caregiver support groups. Because, and those are groups that could be within your community, they could be in person, or they could be online, they could be held virtually. They could be based on, being in a particular geographic location, or it could be disease specific, a caregiver support group of those who are caring for people with Alzheimer's or Parkinson's or cancer, or whatever the case may be. But those groups allow you to have a group learning experience, and by sharing with other caregivers who are in a similar road, you can learn from one another. You can discover new resources. You can have moral support. Sometimes, as an individual family caregiver, you might feel very isolated and alone. And just by participating in a support group, you'll discover you're not alone. There are others who are going through something very similar and can immediately relate to what you're experiencing. And that can really lift you and can allow you to form some very meaningful friendships with these fellow caregivers. And I know of many family caregivers who meet one another in a caregiver support group, and then after their loved ones have passed away, their friendship continues for the rest of their lives, because they've created this deep, meaningful bond because of their support for one another. So in addition, Lakelyn, you talked about counselors, looking externally for counselors, psychologists, social workers. Those professionals are equipped to assist you through some of these major life transitions that you're experiencing as a caregiver. And of course, we have to mention home care, right? Because home care is an outstanding solution for family caregivers who need some help with the tasks of caregiving. And I know that Home Instead offers that type of support all over the US and all over the world. And the caregivers with Home Instead also, they do more than just provide help with the physical tasks. They're also in tune with what's happening emotionally with the family. They provide so much peace of mind to family caregivers, knowing that they can step away from their loved one and know that their loved one's needs are being met and satisfied through a home care service.
Thank you for sharing those methods that people can, or those resources that people can reach out to. And I know that some other people in the chat has offered up some suggestions, such as, an adult day service can be a great support too for the caregiver to get a little bit of respite. So thanks to everyone that has been chatting in. I have one more question for Erin, really, before we open it up for questions from the audience. And We've talked about methods of reflection a little bit so far, Erin, and I know that you have this unique caregiver resilience model that I think can be helpful for caregivers as they're reflecting. So can you tell us a little bit more about that?
I can, yeah. So I developed this model based on research in caregiving, and it's all rooted in social science and adult learning theory. But it's definitely a model that's come from my deep thinking on the topic. And the model represents a framework for you to think about and process your own caregiving experience. And when you think about a framework, it's a way of, if you think about a frame, it's something that holds something else together, right? And you may or may not be aware of it, but it's a way to think about what you're experiencing as a caregiver. And it's marked by words that begin with the letter R. And I know this is a little bit gimmicky, but there is a purpose for that, which is the R words hopefully will make it more memorable and easy for you to use and remember as you're going through your caregiving experience. And those words are roles, ROLES, relationships, realities, rewards, and readiness. And pretty much everything that you experience as a caregiver can fit into one of those 5 domains. Understanding the roles that are implicit in caregiving, honoring the relationships that are involved in caregiving, the historic relationship, the current relationship, the future relationship that you have with your loved one, and understanding how that is being shaped through caregiving. Confronting the realities, we talked about that earlier, but not sweeping things under the rug, but acknowledging some of the hard realities of the situation and confronting them, recognizing and cultivating the rewards of caregiving, consciously choosing to seek the good in your caregiving experience. I love to recommend a gratitude journal for family caregivers, because when you look for the good, you'll see the good. And you'll realize that this isn't all about all of the challenges of caregiving. There actually are some deep rewards that come from it. And then, those 4 R words, they all really sort of focus on the social dynamics and the relational dynamics of caregiving. And I realized for this model to be complete, I've got to do something about the physical tasks of caregiving. And there's so much focus on the physical tasks of caregiving that I was really focused on the social and relational aspects at first. And I said, well, we need to have another R word to encompass the physical tasks of caregiving. And I came up with the word readiness. Because if you're ready to deliver the tasks of caregiving for your loved one, then you can meet their needs whenever and wherever they are. And the way that you develop readiness is through practice. Nobody has trained you to be a family caregiver. You don't have special medical certification or a degree or any sort of preparation necessarily to be a family caregiver. Even healthcare professionals find, they've got healthcare background, but they're not prepared for everything that their loved one needs and what it means for all of the ins and outs of delivering the tasks of caregiving. So how do you become ready to deliver on your loved one's needs? You practice. And so practicing for readiness, that's the 5th R. And I find that caregivers that do that understand roles, that honor relationships, that confront realities, that cultivate rewards and practice for readiness, they are resilient caregivers. That's the 6th R. And that's how you can develop your resilience as a caregiver and be able to meet your loved one's needs over the long trajectory of caregiving.
Thank you for sharing that, Aaron. And we put a link where you can download that caregiver resilience model from Aaron's website. And Aaron, I know we're going to open it up for questions now, but can you tell us how people can access your book and how people can follow your work? I know you have a website. We've been posting some information already, but if you wouldn't mind just giving us the inside scoop on how people can keep in touch with you going forward.
Well, When Caregiving Calls, Guidance as You Care for a Parent, Spouse, or Aging Relative is the name of the book, and that can be found on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, any brick and mortar bookstore. You may have to special order it, but you can buy it there. Also, my website is caregivingkinetics.com, and I'm on Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook. There's a Facebook author page. That was new. They told me I needed to have one of those. So yeah, that's how you could reach out to me.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Aaron, for sharing that information. And if any of you listening, whether you're on Facebook or you're in our Zoom platform, if you have any questions for Dr. Blight, please feel free to type them in now. We had a couple questions that came in ahead of time. So first, Aaron, I'll ask, while people are thinking of their questions and they're chatting them in, how common is caregiving? I know the answer to this, but I would love to get your perspective on this.
Well, Lakelyn, I want to say 2 things in response to that question. First is just the numbers. And last year in May, the AARP and the National Alliance for Caregiving released a report that said that there were 53 million caregivers in America. That was an estimated number, but that's like 20% of the adult population in the US. That's a staggering number of people when you think about it, 53 million. And sometimes people are really surprised to hear how prevalent caregiving is, but it's also one of those things where you don't necessarily think about it until it's staring right at you. And so sometimes when I'm out with groups and I'm speaking to mixed company, people that I know are caregivers, but also not necessarily caregivers, business groups and things like that, I'll actually ask the audience. I'll say, if you've been in a caregiving role, please stand. And probably, it depends on the group, but anywhere from 70 to 80% of the people stand up. And people kind of look around the room and they're like, wow, that's really pretty compelling. And then I usually ask them to raise their hand or something like that if you have been changed as a result. For those who are standing, if you've been changed by caregiving, please indicate. And 100% of them, they always say, I am a different person because of being a caregiver.
Mm. I think that goes back to, you know, the reflection piece of this. And if you're able to reflect on how caregiving has changed your relationship and your just your day-to-day life, then you have that greater appreciation for it. And I know I hear from a lot of caregivers on the other end of the caregiving, when the caregiving is kind of behind them or in their rear view, they say, I've had more time to reflect on it now, and I've realized how much it has changed. So if caregivers can engage in reflection along the way, along their caregiving journey, just think of how profound that would be for them. Not only would they reflect on it at the end of their journey, but throughout. So thank you for sharing that. And Erin, in addition to the numbers, I love the Rosalind Carter quote, who she says there's 4 kinds of people in the world: those who have been caregivers, those who are currently caregivers, those who will be, and then those who will need caregivers. So I think it impacts all of us in one way or another. And if it hasn't yet, it likely will down the road. So I think that's always a great question to kick off our Q&A. But we have a question coming in from Robert. He says, since trust is a huge element in building relationships, what if the person requiring the care has memory problems and trust cannot be developed? That's a really good question, Robert. Thank you for joining us and for asking that. Erin, any thoughts for Robert on that question?
Yeah, Robert, that's a great question. And, I think that family members really struggle with this because oftentimes, if they're caring for a loved one who has Alzheimer's or some form of dementia or severe cognitive problems, and the memory is fading, it can be difficult because the person who's losing their memory, who's losing their cognition, may not implicitly trust you. Sometimes there's a sense of distrust automatically, or even paranoia among individuals that have dementia. And so I think as a family caregiver, you simply do the best that you can and understand that this is the disease. It's not a reflection of how they feel about you or their historic relationship with you. And sometimes, your care receiver may not be communicative, may not be able to express themselves. And so you may not even know if what they're thinking or how they're feeling about your presence. And sometimes in those situations, I have seen it where families say, well, they just write the person off and say, well, it doesn't matter if I visit or not, because they don't know me. They don't know if I'm there. They're not responsive. And I would suggest that perhaps you should rethink that. And your presence, you may not know the impact of your presence, the impact that your presence is having on your loved one there today. But it still is worth it for you to go and to honor that historic relationship with your loved one. And hopefully your presence is having an impact. And every once in a while, you might have a moment of lucidity where your loved one conveys or communicates to you in some way that they recognize you, that you are having an impact on their life. And those are some of those rewards, and they only happen if you're there.
I think those are great thoughts there, Erin. Thank you so much for sharing. And Robert, we hope that has been helpful for you. And as you reflect on your caregiving journey and your relationship, again, you can go to those resources that exist around you. And I'm sure if you were able to join a support group, you would find someone with a similar shared experience and can draw from each other's experiences. And sometimes, when you're working with an individual with cognitive impairment, sometimes one day that person, as Erin mentioned, might be a little more lucid or more accepting of your care and support, and the next day they may not. Or you might start to see a pattern. When you approach a certain task from this angle or with this approach, it works, but not necessarily with others. So you can kind of also keep track of what's working and what's not working, and also draw on that historic relationship that you have with them to understand what were their likes and their dislikes throughout their life of you knowing them, and how could you incorporate those things into the caregiving routine and role to help provide those comforts and that security. And that might be what the person is really yearning for, is especially if they don't have the ability to communicate any longer. They're kind of seeking for familiarity. So those might be a few more things you could consider as well. But we thank you for that question. And Carlos says that yes, support groups are vital to navigating through the caregiving journey. So sounds like a few people on today's webinar, they do engage in support groups. And I know that there are online ones. We have a partnership with Hilarity for Charity, HFC, and they have online support groups, a great network of online support groups. So we can provide a link to their website in the chat. And I know the Alzheimer's Association has some great in-person, as do the other disease-specific organizations, such as Parkinson's Foundation. And if your loved one has Lewy body dementia, there's an association that has support groups specific to that disease process. So a great question. And then I think we have time for about one more question, Erin. How can caregivers tap into their faith as they reflect on caregiving? I know for me, you mentioned a gratitude journal, and that is one of the things that I try to do every night or every other night, is to reflect back on my day. And for me, it almost turns into a prayer. I'm a spiritual person. And so can faith play a role in reflecting? And how can someone tap into that part maybe of their life if it's applicable?
Absolutely, Lakelyn. I really appreciate this question. And there is a chapter in When Caregiving Calls on faith. And I couldn't imagine writing that book without including a chapter on faith. And when I think about faith in caregiving, I really think about three different levels of faith, three different ways that faith can be instrumental in your caregiving experience: faith in God, faith in tomorrow, and faith in yourself. And when you think about faith in God, whatever your belief system is, you may or may not have a belief in God, but if there ever was a time when you thought that you might be able to use God's help, the caregiving journey might be one of those times. And so if you summon an ounce of faith and pray, as you said, and ask God for help and support, I've heard repeatedly caregivers who report that God does open doors and help them and equip them and strengthen them to continue in the caregiver role. And I can't imagine for myself, I know I did a lot of praying as a family caregiver, and it did help me through the process. Faith in tomorrow, I think, is something that family caregivers need to hold on to. And no matter what the challenges are today, it's important to have faith that tomorrow will be better. And tomorrow may not be the next day. Tomorrow might be, weeks from now or months from now, or tomorrow might be the passing of your loved one. But even the passing of your loved one offers a brighter day for tomorrow, because the pain that they are experiencing, the challenges that are associated with aging and disability and illness, those will be gone tomorrow. And so each day to have motivation to get up and conquer the day today, it helps to believe that tomorrow will be better. And the last thing that I like to talk about in terms of faith, Lakelyn, is faith in yourself. Sometimes family caregivers don't feel like they can do this. And there's a reason that you became a family caregiver for your loved one. And whatever that reason is, have faith in yourself and your ability to do what needs to be done. As we said earlier, you're not just automatically a great family caregiver, but if you have faith in yourself, that should allow you to adopt a learning orientation to caregiving, and to realize that, yes, okay, I'm not a perfect caregiver right now, but I can learn, I can adapt, I can be better. So I'm going to have faith in myself and in my ability to grow into this role. And when you couple that faith in yourself with faith in tomorrow, faith in God, you're going to be able to traverse this caregiving road.
Thank you for sharing those thoughts. I really like how you phrase it, faith in God, faith in tomorrow, and faith in yourself. I think that's a beautiful way to close up our chat today. And Erin, I just want to thank you so much for joining me, for sharing about your new book and all of the great resources that you have on your website, which we have posted in the chat, caregivingkinetics.com. And so we just, from the bottom of my heart and from us at Homestead, I just want to thank you for all that you do for family caregivers and for joining me today.
Well, thank you, Lakelyn, and thanks to everyone at Homestead for all that you do to help family caregivers as well. I know firsthand how important your work is and how passionate everyone at Homestead is about the cause of caregiving. And so I just applaud you and salute you for all that you do. Thank you.
Well, it's our pleasure. And we know that it takes a community of all of us working together to support this really important group of people. And this chat series is one of the ways that we aim to do that. And we do this chat every month. And so next month, in the month of August, on Tuesday, August 24th, we'll be talking about focusing on your own brain health. So we talked about how caregivers are often so focused on the tasks that their loved one needs that they put their health, their well-being on the back burner. But a lot of research is coming out that you can do a lot for your own brain health. And caregivers are especially at risk for cognitive impairment. And so there's things we can do now to strengthen our brain and create a cognitive reserve as we age. So we'll be talking with Brooks Kenny. She's the general manager of Brain Guide and the executive director of Women Against Alzheimer's. So I hope you will join us again next month. And you can just follow our Facebook page. We post all the information about our chats that way, or you can visit us on our website at helpforalzheimersfamilies.com. So I hope you'll join us next week. And I want to thank you all for joining us today. Another thank you to Dr. Erin Blight. We hope to see you next month. Stay well, everyone, and take good care of yourselves. Bye.